Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, is one of those films that I've always kind of felt is a little bit like Citizen Kane, in the sense that I kind of always felt like I need to get around to watching it. It's something that, for the sake of, a cinema buff, for the history of cinema, this is one of those films on the list you need to check off. Unlike Citizen Kane, however, a film which I have attempted to watch twice and have managed to fall asleep during both times, this one is highly entertaining and really, really funny. And yeah, also has something very meaningful to say. Not that Citizen Kane doesn't, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I was definitely much more entertained in this film. Strangelove is, of course, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and it is based on a book by Peter George called Red Alert. Now, that book is actually a serious piece of work. It doesn't have the satire element that this film has. And when Kubrick first began work on the screenplay with his producing partner, that's the angle they took for this film. They were trying to make a very serious political film. But as they wrote the piece together, they started to realise just how absurd a lot of the situations were, and it suddenly became a comedy. Kubrick saw the comedy in it, saw the humour in it, and obviously turned it into this big, very famous piece of satire. The film does share some common themes throughout Kubrick's work. You look at Paths of Glory, the film I previously reviewed of Kubrick's, and also Full Metal Jacket, which will be coming up. It's a film that looks at war and the absurdity of it, and primarily the absurdity of those who have the power, those who are able to make the decisions on our behalf, or on the soldiers' behalf. You look at Paths of Glory, you've got a man who's so desperate for his own glory that he's willing to throw all of his men into the firing line. And when it doesn't work, he then wants his own men to be executed in a sort of trial by fire, so to speak. We have that here, although whereas Paths of Glory was a very serious take on the subject matter, on the absurdity of war, this, as I say, is satire. But we still have this look at the leadership, the people who essentially have their finger on the trigger, their finger on the button, the nuclear button in this case. And with that in mind, with the stupidity of some of these characters that we are confronted with, there really is only one inevitable conclusion that you can get from this film. That is, of course, that we are going to wipe ourselves out. The film does play as a very explicit warning to humanity that if we keep moving down the same path that we are moving down, we're going to wipe ourselves out. Now, that is a very heavy message, obviously. It's very somber. It's pretty depressing when you look at it. So it is quite a miracle that Kubrick manages to pull off that message in such a humorous way. And that's helped in no small part to Peter Sellers, who plays three roles here. He plays the president, he plays a soldier, and he plays this rather bizarre kind of German Nazi scientist who has been enlisted by the Americans. Those three performances by Sellers got him an Academy Award nomination, and this film also got a nomination for Best Picture. And you can understand why, you can see why. His three performances are very distinct, very different people. You never get the sense that you are watching Peter Sellers. You get the sense you are watching these three very specific characters, and they're so far apart from each other, so far removed from each other, that it really is entertaining to watch. But this isn't a film that just belongs to Sellers, I've got to say. George C. Scott really impresses here as well. Now, he would obviously go on to win an Academy Award for Patton, which as well would win Best Film at the Oscars. A performance that is very strong indeed. But here as well, he reveals comedic chops, something he wasn't actually all that happy about, because Kubrick during this film would manipulate Scott into going larger, into making it more over the top, something that Scott kind of took issue with. He wanted to bring it back down to earth a little bit more. But I think it was a good call on Kubrick's part. I think this character and the tone of the film overall, I think it suits this really larger-than-life, over-the-top performance from Scott. Some of the funniest moments in the film, for me personally, come from his character. Some of the lines of dialogue he has, and particularly the way he delivers them, with this real over-the-top enthusiasm, yeah, it got some chuckles out of me, I've got to say. But we also get Sterling Hayden as Brigadier General Jack Ripper, who I find really entertaining here. He plays the role very seriously, but the humour comes out of, again, that absurdity of the things he believes in, the things he is doing. And I think that clash between seriousness and satire works very well indeed. Some of the lines of dialogue he has when he's talking about bodily fluids and the Russians' attempt to steal our bodily fluids or infect them in some way. Yeah, this guy is definitely a few barrels short of the load. He is the one who essentially gets the story rolling. He because he's a general, he finds a way around the president's order over the nuclear weapons, and he sends a nuclear bomb to be dropped on Russia, hoping to start a nuclear war which will wipe out the Russians primarily, who he believes are orchestrating some kind of communist agenda, some conspiracy. Like I say, it's hard to truly make out what that conspiracy is, because the way that he puts it into words just comes across as wacky. The film looks really beautiful as well, I must say, helped immensely by the work of Ken Adam, who Bond fans will know as the set designer on some of the biggest Bond films. You know, you think of the Connery era Bond and some of the Roger Moore stuff as well. He created these immense sets that, yeah, you know, you have to get a wide angle on them just so you can soak them up. It would be a crime against the work he's done to kind of get in close and never really truly see these things in all their glory. So yeah, you look at the war room in this film, it's an absolutely beautiful set. I mentioned in my Paths of Glory review that one of the things that had kind of dated with that film were actually the battle scenes. Now, as nice as they still looked, they weren't very kinetic, they were very stilted. It was essentially just a bunch of people running around on a field. And Kubrick goes some way to correcting that here, because it's one of the few times in the film that he actually goes handheld. He shoots in the thick of battle, and it feels very real. It feels very documentary-like. It feels like he's gone into an actual battle sequence, almost like a news reporter, and it really lends some weight to those scenes. Now, overall, I personally preferred Paths of Glory. I'm not generally the comedy guy. As much as I did laugh during this film, there were also jokes that I think went over my head. There were times when I didn't quite see the funny side. Also, towards the end of the film, in the last stretch, the final act, we do get a lot of scenes on this plane that is heading towards Russia, that is trying to drop this bomb. And I kind of get a little bit bored, to be honest, because it's a lot of guys pushing a lot of buttons for a good long while, and a lot of really nasty shots, kind of green screen shots of this model plane flying ridiculously over this Russian terrain. And you know, you can tell it's model work. You can tell that the background, it doesn't look good. It hasn't dated very well at all. And like I say, you know, it's fine for a film of its time, but because there's so much of it in that final stretch, I do kind of find myself checking my watch and wanting to get back to the war room, to be honest. When we get on the plane, whenever we get on the plane, I want to get back to the war room. I want to get back to those characters that I find so endearingly stupid. Even so, as I say, this is a really good film. You know, if you've not seen this one but you are a fan of Kubrick, highly recommend checking it out. And even if you're not a fan of Kubrick, it's not quite like a lot of his other stuff. You know, he's not really generally known as as the humour guy. So yeah, to see this kind of film from him, again, it's another string on his bow that you can understand why people hail him as one of the best directors of all time. 4 out of 5 from me, but what about you? Have you seen Dr. Strangelove? If so, what do you think about it? Comment below, let me know, and until next time, cracking.